Dr. Pamela Pugh, president of the Michigan State Board of Education, has been elected statewide twice in Michigan by over 2 million votes. Additionally, she was the chief public health advisor during the Flint water crisis and prompted both the Obama and Trump administrations to declare the crisis as a national emergency. Today, Dr. Pugh continues to be a staunch advocate against extremist MAGA right-wing policies that censor the teaching of accurate Black American history in K-12 education, as well as against policies that disenfranchise women's reproductive rights and the rights of the LGBTQ+ community. Additionally, Dr. Pugh is unabashed in her fight for environmental justice and gun safety reform. Plainly put, Dr. Pugh is known across the state as a fighter for the people. Dr. Pamela Pugh is currently a candidate for the United States Senate from the state of Michigan. She joins us here today. This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. All right, Dr. Pamela Pugh, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. We've been looking forward to having a conversation about you and everything that you got going on up there. So what we do on this show is we start our stories at the beginning. So do our listeners a favor, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your upbringing and what led you to the career path that you're on today.
Sure. I am sitting here in Saginaw, Michigan, which is a little north of Detroit, Michigan, where I've lived 51 of my 52 years of life. And I have over 25 years of experience forging relationships with partnerships with environmental justice, climate justice, economic justice, education justice of folks, as well as working within government. I think I'm an activist at spirit, but working within government to push out change, and academia, as well as philanthropic community and the business community. And my focus has been around this intersection of health equity, environmental justice, climate justice, and education justice. And so I am elected statewide to our State Board of Education. I've been there for 8 years. I'm currently the president of our State Board of Education. Michigan is unique in that we elect our State Board of Education statewide, and then we're responsible for hiring and evaluating our state superintendent of public education. So we're responsible for, by Constitution, for K-12 education. And then with a background in environmental health, I worked in Flint, Michigan during one of the most horrific man-made crises that we've known in this country's history. So I was the chief public health advisor there, and working side by side with the former mayor of Flint, as well as the people of Flint, and just making sure that we fought to have clean water coming out of taps in Flint, Michigan, that we repaired the infrastructure that was damaged. And part of that was repairing relationship with government, which we still have a long ways to go, because unfortunately our government failed those people, the people of Flint. Sure. And then making sure that we were looking at water affordability while we were doing that. So that's just a little bit about what I've been doing in my life over these past 25 years.
Sure. So, you mentioned a couple of times working in an educational capacity, obviously being elected statewide to the Board of Education. And that seems to be something that is very near and dear to your heart. So what is it about a move to the Senate that is so attractive to you?
I just know that this is a critical time, whether we're looking at our education system that has been challenged. Just on Tuesday, during our State Board of Education meeting, we had Moms for Liberty there, and that's now a group that has been defined as being an extremist group, a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. But we know that there are those people who are hell-bent on removing our history, erasing our history, Black people's history from books and shelves in our school buildings. We also know that these are the same people who have pushed a hate agenda to really mobilize their base as it relates to our LGBTQ plus children in schools. And so I have been very firm in pushing against that hate mongering agenda, and really, again, was elected in 2022 and was the top vote getter in a statewide election, even though I pushed against that. Uh, but looking at what we're seeing in Florida, I went to Florida A&M University, the only HBCU that's a public university, and we're seeing what's happening there, where books are being pulled from shelves. But then turn the corner and look at orange skies in New York City, caused by forest fires. And we can talk about climate change and the fact that we have to take climate action, and having a background in environmental health. I know that this is a pivotal moment in our country's history, and I am a fighter, and a proven fighter, and want to go to Washington, D.C. I know how to get there, being a statewide elected official. So I know how to get to Washington, D.C., but more importantly, to be a voice for the people, a representative for the people, as I have and have proven to be. And so that is why I want to go to Washington, D.C. in this very critical time that we're living in.
Sure, sure. So I want to ask, what was that like, experiencing or learning about the recent attacks on, let's call it American history? It's called critical race theory, but what is it like to, as an educator, see that happening? And I think more importantly, what are the potential implications? Because let me say it this way: there's a side of this country, if we're being fair, that has been led to believe that children's sensitivities should be called into question when determining how to educate them and to what degree they should be educated in terms of our history in this country. And then there's another school of thought that says that this narrative is being co-opted, that this idea that children are somehow afraid is nonsense. We have generations of children who've learned some of the truth and have been fine, and now's not the time to pull back, but rather to educate further. And that these are scare tactics and fear mongering that are used to create an issue where no issue exists, to mobilize a base to taking action, and children typically pull on the heartstrings. So as an educator, kind of witnessing this happen, talk us through what that's like and why that was passionate, and of course, what the implications could be either way.
So first of all, let me say I'm not an educator. I lead our state education table. I am a policymaker. I'm about children.
Sure.
My background is public health. So to your question, and I appreciate the question as well as the statements that you've made.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to a state Senate hearing, what I said to a then Republican-led legislature and on that panel, and I said, as a public health professional, this is harmful to health when you're trying to suppress the voice, suppress a history that, yes, a past that has been ugly, but is also an American story of resilience. But when you're trying to suppress that history to save or to cause less harm for some, while it's a story of much harm done to our people, that's a violent act. And, from a public health perspective, we have to speak truth. We have to allow our truth to be spoken because, one, it happened. We can't act like it did not happen. But it's also an opportunity to talk about overcoming. It's also an opportunity to talk about healing. It's also an opportunity to make sure that history does not repeat itself. Any of us who have studied the Reconstruction period and then the period that came after the Reconstruction period, right, the Redemption period, we know that if we don't know our history, we could happen to, and I think some of this is the intent. We can roll ourselves
Yeah.
backwards and end up having history, repeat
Repeat
itself,
itself. Yeah.
history of oppression, and a time where we're trying to beat back systems of racism. We can walk ourselves right back into that. So being at these decision making tables, what I say is we have to fight back. We can't fight scared. We have to make sure that we call these things as what they are. And because if we don't do that, we'll see what we're seeing now is
Mm.
that the next marginalized population will be impacted, and that is our LGBTQ plus family. And now we're seeing that. So it started off with CRT 1619 project. We don't want Maya Angelou on the bookshelves. We don't want Toni Morrison on the bookshelves. And now it's turning into a greater focus on our LGBTQ plus family. So we have to start when we see the hate, because we know if we don't stop it right there, it's going to go to the next group.
Sure. Sure. Excellent. So, you mentioned being a fighter, and I can kind of, I get a sense of that now, hearing you discuss these topics. I wanna go back for a second. Um, I saw a documentary some years back about the Flint water crisis, and you mentioned that you were literally on the front lines with respect to that time in our country and in the state of Michigan. So, talk to us a bit more about that, and perhaps what you learned during that time, and how you're going to bring those lessons into your role as a senator and use that to fight for the people of Michigan and the people of the United States.
Yeah, so I was on the ground for almost a year,
Mhm.
doing just talking to residents. I was there with the NAACP and Jackie Patterson, who was the NAACP's executive director for climate and environmental justice, and we were just taking the voice of people, and we turned that into what was a 15-point plan that
Mhm.
then grew into a 20-point plan or priority list of things that the residents said that they needed to see in order for repair and reparations to come about. And that list was like the first list that was being used by then president of the NAACP, Cornell Brooks, and the mayor, Karen Weaver, as well as the local NAACP to take into the rooms with the governor and other decision makers. And they used that. And it was things like, uh, for us, by us. Don't send the police into the city of Flint to hand out water. Um, that could be problematic.
Sure.
But make sure you're sending people who can speak to our Latino population. Make sure and undocumented people. Make sure that you can that this can be an economic opportunity for those who have long had suffered from divestment in that community. So we had to how the pipes would be replaced. That's so for a year. That's what I was working on. Speed up. Mayor Weaver asked President Obama. I told him, look, I need somebody in my office in City Hall who can bring the facts, bring them in a timely manner, and someone who I can trust. And I had been working with Dr. Monahan Hatisha, who was the first to bring about some of these issues with data that we were seeing with the high lead levels in children in Flint.
Yeah.
So these worlds met, and the timing was divine. And so I walked into that position, and what I saw was a resilient people, a people in Flint who were, some will say, was the birth of the middle class, a very proud people. But I saw a people whose voices had just gone unheard, whose government had completely failed them. And it started with the water switch that the residents knew was going to be problematic. But then it continued when people were seeing hair loss, when they were seeing the rashes, when they were noticing the pipes being corroded. that their government was still acting as if what they were seeing and experience wasn't happening. So a
Right.
resilient people, but a resilient people that we cannot ever forget, a resilient people that if we forget what happened in Flint, we will see it in New Jersey, we'll see it um, in Ohio, we will see it in Jackson, Mississippi, we will see it in
Mm.
Benton Harbor. And so we cannot forget what happened in Flint, where they were met with injustice at every turn and step that they met with, even just recently with the previous governor, Rick Snyder, who was at the helm of this water switch, just announced last week that he's getting this wonderful job. He didn't spend any time in paying for what he did to the people. So, and then when we look at the payments back through the civil suits, that those are problematic and unrealized, yet to be realized. There's still the harm that was done to those people could happen anywhere. And so we know that we need leadership in Washington, D.C., that are responsive to the people, that are making sure that we have government and government agencies and those who are leading those agencies who are serving the people because that's what they're there for. As a U.S. Senator, making sure that we're getting resources to the people and that they can use those resources in those local communities in the way that they best know how. But really just making sure that the government does what it's supposed to do and protect people regardless of their race, regardless of their socioeconomic status.
Right.
And so that is what I would carry to Washington, D.C. And then working on the ground and seeing how we were able to bring resources into Flint. And a lot of times I was the person who was traveling with Mayor Weaver to the then mayor at the time and making sure that we were talking to the White House officials, to our Senate delegation, our in Congress persons, and making sure that we were getting those resources to Flint.
Wonderful. We are here today with the president of the Michigan State Board of Education and candidate for the United States Senate from the state of Michigan, Dr. Pamela Pugh. All right, so I want to, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, I want to modify or add to a statement that you made there. You mentioned that effectually what you communicated was that what happened in Michigan could conceivably happen anywhere. And what I've come to understand about Michigan, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that is a textbook example of environmental racism.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that it could happen anywhere, while I understand kind of when we were kind of going through this, a larger
Mm-hmm.
statement and making a larger point, that could kind of get out there. Typically, we see things like that happen
Yes.
in Black and brown and poor communities,
Yes.
people without the capacity to push back and to advocate for the health of themselves and their children and the future of their community. And that affects housing prices, that affects healthcare outcomes, which already disproportionately and negatively affect Black and brown people in this country, and so forth and so on. So I wanted to make sure that I stated that, and feel free to add anything there.
Thank you.
But
Absolutely, I have. Yes, that's
okay.
exactly.
Well, then please, your thoughts.
No, I mean that is exactly. We know that this would not have happened if it would have been one of our more affluent.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
That's what I figured you meant. I just wanted to make sure that for our listeners, they
absolutely.
So here's what I want to ask. Looking forward, how do you want your leadership to impact the people of Michigan? And then I want to ask a separate question, but very similar. But first, let's start there. How do you want your leadership to impact the people of Michigan?
The people of Michigan we're fighters ourselves, and they want to have leadership that are fighters. We're hard workers. And so how I want to make an impression is really just making sure that I carry an agenda that's about economic justice, economic dignity, and looking at the pathways of how we get there. So when we talk about economic dignity, making sure that people have access to good paying jobs, I'm talking about jobs where these are family sustaining wages. I'm talking about entrepreneurial opportunities where we're not crushing people's creativity, but allowing people to create and being able to earn a living where
Mm.
they can have a good quality of life, access to quality health care, affordable health care. They can enjoy the day after work, but then being able to retire with dignity. And we know that a good education system is a pathway to get us there.
Mm.
An education where we're investing in our children. And education system here in Michigan, I'll say that we're at the bottom of the 50 states when we look at how we fund schools equitably, meaning that children where there are communities where there's greater, lower income children, where there's a higher number of English language learners and special needs, children with special needs. We're at the bottom of funding there. We also know that when we look at the comparison of per pupil funding to how much we're funding for prisoners, for people to go to the prisoners to prison, um, those costs should not be in the way that they are now. We should be paying more for per pupil students, but
Sure.
education is a pathway to economic dignity. But we also know that we can have a healthy economy where we have clean jobs, where we're looking at renewable energy opportunities, a more sustainable pathway as we're looking at our energy choices. And that's also addressing climate. That's taking climate action. That means that we're saving our planet. We're addressing public health issues. We're reducing our dependency on foreign oil, but we're also creating a pathway and a way to good paying jobs. So the stamp that I would want to leave and the path that I would like to put forward is a way for us to all reach towards economic dignity.
Understood. Now, a lot of our listeners, of course, live in Michigan, but a lot live outside of Michigan. And the spotlight that comes with being a U.S. senator also comes with the capacity to exact a degree of influence. So how do you want your leadership to impact the United States at large?
I think first of all, representation matters.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, there are no African American women at this time in the U.S. Senate. We know that there's only been two. The first, Carol Mosley Braun, is from right here in the Midwest. So we know we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely want to make sure that I'm there representing all people here in Michigan, but all people across this country, and bringing what we know that Black women bring to the table as
Imagine.
well. But and just being the loudmouth that I know that I can be.
Sure.
In a diplomatic way, and but being a fighter for people and for the issues that matter most to people here in Michigan, but those are the issues that matter to folks across this state, across this country. Economic justice, opportunity to have good paying jobs, quality of life, having clean air to breathe, safe water to drink, good education, strong public education system for our children, having access to quality and affordable health care. That matters to people across this country and our diverse population here in Michigan.
I love it. So I have a couple more questions for you. But the important of the two is, what makes you different from the field of candidates against which you are running?
I have a proven track record, as I've talked about. people know that I am there speaking for the everyday person.
Mm.
People know that I have a track record of fighting back when it's necessary, uh, and I've I've been involved in crises, whether it's the gun violence, that is a public health crisis that's plaguing our children in our communities. It's been plaguing our communities, and now it's the number one killer of all children.
Mm.
And then whether I'm talking about the crisis of water, clean, affordable water, and the issue of climate, addressing climate not just as saving our planet, but a public health issue as well as an economic opportunity. But I'm statewide elected,
Mm.
not once, but twice.
Say it.
I won in 2012 when they told me when the rest it was in 2014 when Republicans swept the top of the ticket. We lost our gubernatorial election, we lost the Secretary of State, we lost AG on down the ticket. And when I went to the war room, I was going into the war room, they were shutting down. They said, Pam, they're like, just go to sleep. Wisdom tells us, conventional wisdom tells us that if we lost the top of the governor lost, you lost.
Mm-hmm.
And the next morning I had the email telling me, okay, we were wrong. Congratulations. And I was the top vote getter. 2022, after pushing it back against all the hate and vitriol that we've experienced across the state, this country, woke up and, I didn't even have to go to sleep. I won and won handily. And so I'm the only statewide elected, not once, but twice. So having a proven track record, being outspoken when it comes to standing for everyday people and the things that we value most, and then being, like I said, the electability factor speaks for itself. And I've been consistent. So those are all qualities that are very easy to find about me, and definitely differentiate me. Michigan made. I'm Michigan made.
That way.
And,
Before we let you go, I know that there's going to be a lot of folks who maybe they live in Michigan. Shout out to all the Michiganders and the folks from Detroit. What up, though? Those folks will want to vote for you. But maybe there's folks outside of Michigan that maybe they want to keep up with your journey. Maybe they want to donate to your campaign. Maybe they want to support in some meaningful way. Before you go, will you please let our listeners know how they can plug in with you? This includes your social media, websites, email addresses, you name it. If you got a book out, if you got a TV show coming, if you're about to drop a mixtape, anything, let them know.
I thought about the mixtape, but haven't gotten there yet. So they can go to PughMichigan.com, PughMichigan.com, and they'll find all the social handles there, because I better not start trying to call them out. But PughMichigan.com. And this is going to be a hard work. Most of the things that I've done have been hard work. We need people to talk to all their friends and family. If you're in Michigan, but outside of Michigan, I know you know somebody in Detroit, Flint, Saginaw, somewhere in Michigan, you know someone. And I should shout out Grand Rapids as well. But just making sure that you're reaching out to the people, your people in Michigan. But donations, we definitely need donations. This will be a huge undertaking. But this is a grassroots campaign, and we need people to go to the website. They can sign up to volunteer. And if they're outside of the state of Michigan, they can go there to volunteer too, because we will be doing phone banking, phone calling. And so, as we've seen with the other Senate races, these will be nationalized races. And we know in 2024, this would be a huge election year, not only for the senatorial race, but also for the presidential race. So, and Michigan is a critical state for that as well.
Sure. So I want to make sure I get that right for our listeners. Pugh, Michigan. That's P-U-G-H.
That's correct.
That's okay. PUGHmichigan.com.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, wonderful. Well, I tell you what, you're an inspiring person. I love what you stand for, and it's been a total joy. So I'd like to thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts and your insights and your platform and your successes and your future successes with us here at the Black Information Network. Once again, our guest is the president of the Michigan State Board of Education and candidate for the United States Senate from the state of Michigan, Dr. Pamela Pugh.
Thank you for having me.
This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show was produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. Join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.